Welcome back in open session. I'm going to hand the floor to Steve Willward for his report on the Merit Review Commission. Steve?
Thank you very much, Dan. The NSB-NSF Commission on Merit Review has had a busy schedule since our last report to the board, and we're looking forward to discussing our preliminary policy recommendations with you today. We have slides. Before I proceed, I'd like to acknowledge our Vice Chair, Wanda Ward, who is a delight to work with, as well as the rest of our joint commission comprised of NSF staff and NSB members who you see on the screen, as well as the commission staff. This has been truly a team effort. We've been hard at work for over a year, soliciting input from various stakeholder groups and engaging in thoughtful discussions to develop our preliminary recommendations to the board. We meet at least once or twice a month for 3-hour sessions. It's been an incredibly intensive process. As much as possible, we'd like this to be a transparent process, and we invite feedback and suggestions from the public. Please reach out with questions or comments via email at meritreviewcommission@nsf.gov. And to learn more about the activities regarding this reexamination, visit nsf.gov/NSB. We especially encourage board members as well as members of the public to watch previous commission meetings, which are available on the NSB YouTube page. Today, we're here to share what we've been up to over the past year, preview our preliminary recommendations, and get your feedback. But first, I'd like to set the stage for where we find ourselves today. After the proposal evaluation criterion of scientific merit was established in 1951, the board approved varying numbers of additional criteria for academic research, marking an emergence of benefits to society as a critical component of federally funded research. The numbers of these criteria has changed several times over the decades. The latest change came after Congress passed the Government Performance and Results Act, GPRA, in 1993. GPRA mandated the tying of agency goals and strategies specifically to performance outcomes. In response, the board reduced the merit review criteria to 2, intellectual merit and broader impacts, which remain in place today. The board has promoted stakeholder understanding and use of the broader impacts criterion to drive delivery of societal benefits from NSF science and education investments. As stewards of the merit review policy and process at the end of 2022, the board determined that the time was right for another reexamination and examined and established the Commission on Merit Review more than 12 years after its last comprehensive assessment. In those 12 years, in part in response to the Competes Act of 2010, NSF has changed its approach to broader impacts, including by supporting ARIS and its predecessor, NABI. We now have an opportunity to learn and to improve because of the work that you have done over the past decade. While the number of criteria used in the merit review process has changed over the years, the overall objective of these criteria has largely remained the same, which is to advance the agency's statutory mission to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense, and for other purposes. These are the first words in the NSF Act of 1950 and a key anchor for how the board interprets and assesses the merit review process. The 2 board-approved criteria, intellectual merit and broader impacts, work together to identify proposals that will both promote the process of science and progress of science, as well as advance the nation's health, prosperity, welfare, and security. Ensuring that these criteria lead specifically to these outcomes and that we are able to measure their impact is essential. It is with this knowledge that the board established the commission in December 2022 and charged us to, quote, assess the efficacy of the current merit review policy and associated criteria and processes at supporting NSF's mission to create new knowledge, fully empowered diverse talent to participate in STEM and benefit society by translating knowledge into solutions. With the goal of determining the extent to which the merit review process and criteria achieving NSF's mission and identify any changes if needed, are required to achieve that mission. The Commission's work is grounded in the agency's statutory mission, which, to repeat it again, is to promote the progress of science, to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense, and for other purposes. This mission also serves as a guide for all of NSF's activities, including merit review policy and processes. Anchored by NSF's mission, our work has been broken down into 3 topic areas that flow from one to another. First, understanding and assessing the board's merit review policy. 2, understanding and assessing how the board's policy is implemented by proposers, reviewers, program officers, and others. And 3, understanding and assessing how we know that the board's policies are being successfully fulfilled and we are fulfilling NSF's statutory mission. We begin our examination with policy, resulting in a set of preliminary recommendations, which we will share momentarily. In July, we look forward to returning with a set of preliminary implementation and accountability instructions for the board. And in December, we aim to bring a final list of policy recommendations and implementation and accountability suggestions for the board to approve. Our policy work involves us examining 3 fundamental parts. 1, the merit review principles, which establish values and contextual considerations by which merit review is guided. 2, the 2 board-approved merit review criteria by which all proposals are evaluated. And 3, the merit review elements, which guide reviewers and proposers on what should be considered in the review of both criteria. Over the past year, we have been engaged in a multi-part information gathering process to inform our preliminary policy recommendations. This includes reviewing relevant literature, including multiple ARIS reports, NASEM reports, board policy reports, NSF reports, and key legislation, including the Competes Act, AICA, and CHIPS and Science. We also held numerous discussions on board-approved merit review criteria, principles, and elements, federal agency review policies and processes, additional criteria evaluation, high-risk, high-reward research, portfolio balance, and broadening participation and DEIA. We spoke with subject matter experts, both internal and external to the NSF. We also held listening sessions with members of the Center for Advancing Research Impact in Society, that's the ARIS I was talking about last March, and university administrators and public engagement officials from the Big Ten Academic Alliance in January of this year. As I said, this information serves as the basis of our preliminary policy recommendations, which will be shared momentarily, and our preliminary implementation and accountability suggestions, which will be shared at the next board meeting. However, it is worth mentioning that we're currently analyzing data gathered from NSF leaders and program staff about their experiences with merit review. And this summer, we plan to solicit input from various external stakeholders, including the broader public. The addition of this data will inform our final report and final recommendations and suggestions to the board at the end of the year. With that, I'd like to share our high-level preliminary policy recommendations. The first preliminary policy recommendation to the board is NSB should reaffirm that NSF's merit review is the gold standard for awarding funding. We've looked high and low across this country and across the world about how money is established, and I think we are incredibly blessed to be able to have the standard of review that has stood the test of time and is an efficient use of taxpayer dollars to fulfill our mission. The second preliminary policy recommendation is the 2 current criteria, that is intellectual merit and broader impacts, fully meet NSF's mission. The Commission anticipates recommending clarifications about the alignment of other review criteria with these 2 merit review criteria. The third is to emphasize the NSF imperatives both to deliver societal benefits and to promote the progress of science, in accordance with the NSF Act and other applicable statutes. 4, emphasize that NSF continues to promote the progress of science in accordance with the NSF Act and other applicable statutes. There are so many statutes that we have examined and worked to think about ways of integrating all of that input with what we have already developed in terms of our 2 research criterion. The 5th is to ensure portfolio development and monitoring to maximize NSF's intellectual impacts and societal benefits. We very much focused on how do we get to outcomes? How do we know what is accomplished? How do we know that what is proposed was actually done? What are the lessons learned from that? This is a subject that we're discussing actively right now, and it will figure in our report in July and then in December. And finally, the 6th and last preliminary policy recommendation to NSB is strengthen and broaden participation in the merit review process. Broadening participation is so important across the agency. Punch and his team have made it a priority, and we support that and are thinking about how it applies to both intellectual merit as well as the typical broader impacts. Again, I'd like to reiterate these are preliminary merit review policy recommendations to the board. Final policy recommendations will be presented in December. In addition, at the next board meeting in July, the Commission will deliver preliminary merit review implementation and accountability suggestions to the board, with finalized suggestions also delivered in December. Finally, I'd like to thank my colleagues, particularly our Vice Chair Wanda Ward, as well as staff, for their time and attention to this reexamination over the past year. I have greatly appreciated your contributions, and I look forward to continuing to support the Commission in the future. This concludes the Commission on Merit Review report. I turn it back to you, Dan.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Much appreciated. As Steve has emphasized, Congress has given NSF goals for broader impacts. And so this process is about trying to deliver on that.